Hey guys, so today I'm going to be planting some vegetables in the garden. While I'm doing that, I want to talk to you about some mistakes that you don't want to make when you're planting vegetables. Now, I'm going to be giving you some mistakes I can think of while I'm here planting. If you have made mistakes and learned from them, please leave those in the comments below because we could all take everyone's collective knowledge and experience and use that to better our gardens. Now, the first mistake is putting your vegetables out too early. And this is pretty easy to do this year because everything's been pushed later because of everyone's cold, wet, long winter, with a few exceptions out there. In general, you want to wait until all danger of frost is past for most vegetables. And you can find your frost date by Googling your zip code, city, whatever, and frost date. And it will give you your first frost date, which is in the fall or winter, and then your last frost date, which is sometime around now or a month or two ago. So for most things, wait till after that frost date is past, the last frost date. But then for certain vegetables, heat lovers like melons and okra and peppers, you want to wait till really the nights are no lower than like 55, 60, and then you can go ahead and put those out. That's kind of a broad mistake that really gets your vegetable garden off on the wrong foot. Another broad mistake is not planting in enough sun. Now today we have no sun, but you need to know that your vegetable garden will receive 6 to 8 hours of full sun every single day. You also don't want to plant any root-bound vegetables. You want to inspect when you're at the garden center and you're looking at 6-packs. Pull them out of their pots and see the root system. Really inspect it. You want to see a lot of roots, but you don't want to see them wrapping around and around and around. If it does that, put it back and get a different one. You also want to make sure the roots are nice and white and healthy. If they're brown like this, you can't even see them from the camera, but if they're brown, that means they are not healthy. Put that one back and get a different one. If you started your seedlings indoors yourself, you want to make sure not only that you're past your last frost date before you put them out, you want to make sure you harden them off. And that just means getting them accustomed to the outside world. They've been babied inside with very little variance in temperature or sunlight or anything. It's all been perfectly provided by you. And so just to toss them outside and expect them to be able to deal with the harsher sunlight, wind, cold, heat, fluctuations, that's not going to be great. So if you've got 3 days like this, overcast, in a row coming up, you can put your seeds out in the morning, provided it's not too cold, and then let them sit there all day long for 3 days, and that will harden them off. If you don't have overcast weather, then you want to try and take them out a little bit more each day. Start them the first day in the shade for a few hours. Then the next day, you want to give them maybe a couple of hours of sun, and then put them back inside or in the shade again. The next day, an extra hour. By the end of the 5-day period, maybe 7-day period, they're good enough. They've had enough easing in to the amount of hours they've been, out there in the elements. They're going to be fine. You'll be able to put them in the garden then. When you take a seedling from its 6-pack or whatever container you've got it growing in, you don't want to just kind of pull up on it. That could rip the roots. That could break the stem. When either of those two things are happening, you either kill your plant or set it up on a road to unsatisfactory results. So what you want to do is, squeeze the bottom of the container or go through the drainage hole with a pencil or your finger and just kind of push it up, and then handle it by the leaves, not by the stem. Because if you break a leaf off, not a big deal. But if you break the stem off, that's a big deal. And they're a lot more handleable by leaves than you think they are. You want to also make sure that you're planting them with the correct spacing between other plants. Now, that could depend on if you're growing in the ground or a raised bed and how you're growing them. So if you're growing in the ground, you want to look at the seed packet and it will say spacing. It'll say plant spacing and row spacing. And if you're growing in the ground, you kind of need to be aware of both of those. I think the row spacing is sometimes a little bit pronounced, so you could go a little bit closer than what it says. But it just gives you a space to walk between the rows without having to step on plants. In raised beds, that doesn't matter because we're not stepping in our beds. So you can just plant them the spacing they're supposed to be for the plant spacing, and don't even worry about the row spacing. Depending on how you're planting them or growing them, it could be different. I'm growing these cucumbers right here up these strings using my tomato hooks. Same with tomatoes. Now, generally you would plant cucumbers a lot farther apart because they kind of spread out on the ground. Tomatoes, if you're not growing them on strings or hooks, you want to plant them further apart, maybe 2 to 3 feet apart for some indeterminates. But when you're growing them vertically like this, I've got these a foot apart. That gives me a lot more plants in a lot less room because we're taking advantage of the vertical real estate rather than horizontal. So that's a really good tip if you've got a small space garden. Here I've got my pole beans coming up, and they are planted a good 1.5 feet apart to grow up this teepee. But here I've got bush beans, and they are growing relatively close together, less than a foot apart, maybe more like 8-9 inches, because they're okay with that. They can kind of bunch together and use each other to hold themselves up. Same with peppers. You can plant 2 peppers maybe 1 inch or 2 apart, and they actually grow better that way, just with 2, and then plant those pairs about a foot apart. When you're actually doing the planting of your vegetables from transplants, you want to make sure you do it either on an overcast day like this. So any time of day on an overcast day is fine. However, if it's not overcast, you really want to do it in the early morning, or my preference would be the late evening. And that just gives them a little bit of time to get used to where they are, get their bearings before that hot sun comes out and just wilts them down. It's already a stressful situation being transplanted, and so let's take some of that stress away by getting some of that hot sun off of them. And by planting them in the evening, they've got all night to recover before the sun comes out the next day. Another mistake is planting too deep or too shallow. When you plant something, you want to make sure that the top of where it was growing is at the top of where you're planting it. So this hole is too deep. So I'm going to fill in just a little bit till it's about even, and then cover it up. Now, there are a few exceptions to this rule. Plants in the nightshade family, eggplants, and peppers can be planted a little bit deeper. They don't always do wonderfully, but they can be planted deeper. But tomatoes definitely should be planted deeper than they're growing, as deep as you can get them, because they grow roots all along the stem. Now, when I just planted that eggplant here, I made a mistake a lot of people make, and that is not fertilizing at planting time. And so what I like to do is when you plant something, take some organic fertilizer, preferably something that's kind of slow and immediate release together. You can use bone meal and blood meal. I prefer Neptune's Harvest, crab and lobster, and kelp meal. It's got all kinds of... Now, you buy them separately and then mix them together, but you can see it's got different size flakes. So that means the bigger size flakes will take longer to break down, and the smaller will take shorter. So it gives you a longer period of nutrients to the soil. And all it really takes is just a handful mixed into the bottom. Because it's organic, you're not going to burn your plants if you happen to get too much. And then go ahead and plant your plant there on top of it. If you have a slug issue, a snail issue, a sow bug issue, a earwig issue, then it's a good time at planting time to sprinkle something like Sluggo Plus, which is an organic solution for all the things I just mentioned. At my old house, I really didn't have an issue with any of those. And at this house, one or more of those are taking out my seedlings right and left. And this has really helped with that. So I'll leave links to all these products down below for Neptune's Harvest. As always, we have a discount code there, so make sure you put that in. Another simple mistake people make is not watering as soon as you plant those seedlings. If you're not getting a measurable amount of rain in the next 30 minutes, you need to water them. Just make sure you saturate the area right around those plants within 10 to 15 minutes, especially on a hot day. The next mistake people make is not mulching. When you mulch, you inhibit the growth of weeds, but more importantly, in my opinion and in my dry climate, you keep the moisture in the soil where it needs to be. On one of my recent videos, I showed you a plant, the same kind of plant. It was planted at the same time in the same soil. One had mulch and one didn't. And you can just tell the difference in the size and vigor between the plants. And you can use anything that will break down for mulch. You can use newspaper, you can use pine shavings like I'm using here, you can use grass clippings as long as you don't put them on too thick, leaves, wood chips, straw, any of those will work, and they all have their pluses and minuses. Now, when I started using this year, I got lots of questions about pine shavings pulling nitrogen from the soil and taking it away from your plants. Now, that is a concern, but only if you mix those pine shavings into the soil. So when you're planting something, you want to make sure that you take all that mulch away. Look how much better this soil under here looks with mulch. It's nice and dark and moist. Plant your plant and then return the mulch. Don't get it all mixed into the soil, because then, yes, as this breaks down under the ground, it pulls nitrogen from the roots of your plants. We don't want that to happen. So keep it on top and you're good to go. So those were some of the mistakes that I could think about while I was out here planting that I wanted to share with you. If you have more, again, please leave them down in the comments below. We'd all love to glean from as many people's experiences as possible. If you learned something, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, share it with a gardening friend, and I'll see you next time.